Hi, my name is Clive and I'm a director of Peak Accountancy Training. We provide online courses that you can use to study towards your AAT exams at levels 2, 3 and 4. If you're interested in our courses, please do visit our website www.peakaccountancytraining.co.uk. Well, in this recording, I'm going to walk you through task 3 of the AAT Sample Assessment 2 for PCTN, Principles of Costing. So let's have a look then at task 3, broken down into multiple requirements, all adding up to an overall mark of 8. So this task, we're told, is about recording costs, and the first requirement is all about the classification of costs, which is very important to be able to understand and to be able to do to make sense of costs and to be able to provide costings which will help us as management accountants to provide management information for those business decisions, for planning, for the control of the business. So we're asked to identify how 3 specific costs are to be classified. 4 specific costs. I didn't scroll down quite enough. So to start with, direct and indirect costs, how are they classified? Let's have a look at our options. We've got classified by nature, classified by function, classified by elements, or classified by their behavior. Let's take each one of those in turn to start with and just try and understand what that classification means. Classification by nature, and straight away I'm going to answer the question here, means to classify the cost in terms of whether it's a direct cost or an indirect cost. A direct cost is one which can be specifically and wholly attributed to doing a particular thing, whether it's producing a unit of a product, providing a unit of a service, or performing a particular task. There is a straight relationship between the activity and the cost. So in one way you could say, well, if we didn't do the activity, we wouldn't incur the cost at all. That is the nature of a direct cost. An indirect cost, often referred to as an overhead of an organisation, is a cost that is incurred but not specifically for doing a particular thing. So for example, if you have the costs of an office, within that office your organisation is providing many different services, then the costs for the office are being incurred regardless of whether within the office you're providing any services at all, yet alone which particular type of service. The cost is independent of the specific activity. So if we are classifying costs according to whether they're direct or indirect, we are classifying them as to their nature. So what about materials, labour and overheads? Well, picking out from our options then, the one we're trying to select here is that we are classifying by element. Classifying by element basically means that you are classifying things according to the type of expenditure, and that would be true of materials, labour and overheads. Very useful information for an organisation to know the total amount it is spending on materials, the total amount it is spending on labour, and of course being able to drill that total amount down to what it is spending for materials on a particular job, for example. So materials, labour and overheads are an example of classifying by cost element, by expense type if you like. Now, fixed, variable and semi-variable costs, we are looking at classifying costs by their behaviour. How are those costs going to change dependent on what we're doing, depending on our level of operation? A variable cost in total is going to increase the more activity activity we perform, whereas a fixed cost will stay the same in total regardless of the level of activity we are performing at. Finally, a department cost is a good example of classifying a cost by function, by functional area of the business. We would want to know as managers how much it is costing to run our accounts department, for example, how much it is costing to run our HR department or our administration department. So, cost classification by nature, by element, by behaviour, or indeed by function. So, next we have a requirement on coding systems. Now, we are all used to dealing with codes. They are a very good way of uniquely identifying something. If we're talking about a product or a material, for example, they're a very useful way of collecting information. Account codes, for example, within a general ledger, helping us to understand the reason for the cost, what part of the business has incurred the cost and for what reason. So we're surrounded by codes. So we need to answer a question on advantages and disadvantages of having codes. Basically, do they enable us to retrieve information easily and quickly? Just think of the nominal or the general ledger account codes, being able to pull a report from those systems by doing a search for particular account codes. It is a distinct advantage. Think how long it would take us to pull a report together if we were going down our account hierarchy, for example, just looking for the name of the account rather than the code. Easy to miscode a bill. Is that an advantage of a coding system or a disadvantage? Well, that's got to be a disadvantage, hasn't it? It would be very easy, relatively easy, for somebody to post a transaction to the wrong account, and fundamentally that will change our view of part of a business operation or indeed the performance of the business. So with codes, it is very easy, of course, to miscode something, put it to the wrong account, put it to the wrong place. Okay, well, we next have a coding application question. We are given a code book, and what we've got to do is to use that code book to code up the following sales transactions. The first one has been completed for us. We have a sales transaction which has been completed by the Bristol office, so the code begins with BO. For client A, so the second part of the code refers to the specific client. Client A is 001, and then finally the end of the code refers to the type of sale. It's for year-end accounts, so the code ends with YE. So using the coding system, we could pull off from our general ledger, for example, all of the income generated by the Bristol office. We could pull off all of the income generated for client A. We could pull off all of the income that has been generated for year-end accounts work, regardless of the office that has been involved. This goes back to the earlier question, the adaptability of coding systems, allowing for easier information retrieval. So let's complete our coding then. Completion by the East Anglian office, so the code would begin with EO. This is for client C, so that would be code 003, and it's for VAT return work. The code would end in VR. What about the last one then? The completion is by the Devon office, DO. For client B, 002, and it's for their bookkeeping work. The account would end in BK. Okay, well that brings us to the end of task 3 of the Principles of Costing Sample Assessment 2.